Hello everyone, this is Bentley from Kent, Washington, and today, as the title suggests, we're going to talk about the power outage I just dealt with. Stay tuned, I'm going to teach you how I got through a power outage with no generator and didn't lose any fish. So, the Seattle area lost power due to a massive windstorm. And I lost power in kind of two little spurts, but they were very close together. So at first over the weekend, Saturday, like 1:30 in the morning or so, we lose power. And I happened to be awake. I was working on some stuff, and everything goes out. My computer's spare power supply, my UPS, was sitting there beeping at me, and immediately I'm going around just seeing first how bad it is. Yeah, it's a power outage. I didn't just blow a breaker or something. So from there, I had enough heat in a lot of my rooms and wasn't panicking too much. So I kind of just let it go. Originally, we had this message saying that like power is going to be back on within 2 hours, which usually when we have power outages in the Seattle area, it's pretty common that there'll be small things like a transformer or something like that, and they'll fix them fairly quickly. So I stayed up until 3:30 in the morning. Update says, oh, it'll be done by 5:30 in the morning. Set an alarm, got myself 2 hours of sleep, woke up, no power. Okay, I'm going to sleep another 2 hours, and then we'll see in the morning what I need to do around the house. So wake up at 7:30 in the morning, no power. Now we go into panic mode. Like, okay, we're going to have a real power outage. And I'm looking at some of the stuff from my power company, and it's like hundreds of thousands of people. I think it was like 330,000 people or something like that were out of power. So that's where it's like, okay, I'd been kind of pushing getting some emergency power outage supplies because this is the first power outage I've had in my home, and I've lived here a little over 5 years now. This area just really doesn't see power outages. We don't see big storms that cause them. So I haven't been ultra paranoid about it. What does that mean? That means I was scrambling hard. So the first thing I did is I drove up to Aquarium Co-op as soon as they opened that day, and I picked up a bunch of these. These are a little battery-powered air pump. So number one, have these. Especially if you live in an area where power outages are common or big storms are common, just have a few of these lying around. Have one per tank. Maybe even if you're using gang valves and you have a lot of little tanks like 10s, you could probably run one of these to a gang valve for 3 tanks. You know, I would say 2 is safer, but you could probably run up to 3 or 4 tanks off of a gang valve and just get very light airflow. Now, there's an interesting thought about this that Dean has mentioned to me, that he thinks it's not necessarily the smartest idea to run these because you're pumping in all this cold air from around you. Well, pumping cold air into a water system is just kind of like air conditioning it, right? You're going to cool it off with that air. So I have a lot of tanks, right? How am I doing this when I could only get 7 of these, by the way? That was the most my budget could really afford. And they're not expensive, but when you buy 7 or 8, that adds up real fast. So I have 22 tanks running right now, and I had 7 air pumps. AKA, I definitely did not have air in every tank. So what did I do to make sure I had oxygen in all of my tanks? First off, I went around and I found the least planted tanks. So like the fry system where all the rainbow fry are growing up, the Shelley's tanks, these are great examples of tanks that don't have a lot of plants. They need supplemental oxygen. Those tanks took priority. And then some of the bigger tanks that have very slow plants, like my 90-gallon that has all the swords and the Madagascar lace, those aren't pulling a ton. They're not doing huge amounts of photosynthesis. So air went into some of those. And then some of the other tanks that inherently have sponge filters in them, that's their filtration, those were getting the air pumps. Okay, well in 18 hours it's not so bad. We got power back. It's Sunday at, I think it was like 5:36. I mean, you could actually do the math and figure out what it was. It's kind of all a blur for me, but I know it was in the evening. I was actually out to dinner with my mother, who was in town, hi, Mom. But you know, she, my girlfriend and I were all out to dinner, and I got this text alert that said, "Hey, you should have power back," which is this wonderful blessing. I'm feeling really good. Go home, power's back, zip through, check all the filtration, all that kind of stuff. Make sure that everything's running. Get timers fixed. Start monitoring temperature, and for the next like hour or so, I'm just paying attention to stuff. About 16 hours later, we lose power again. Massive transformer explosion, and this time I lost power for 37 hours. So if you combine that, that's 55 hours of no power across 4 days. So like almost 3 of the 4 days without power if you kind of look at how the spread happens. This is where I had to do a lot more emergency stuff. So let's break into like the real advice I have for you. Number one, pay attention to what your rooms are like. If you are if all your fish tanks are in a basement and there isn't ambient light from windows, no matter how well planted they are, those plants are not going to photosynthesize because they're not getting light. And if they're not photosynthesizing, they're not producing oxygen. They're going to absorb oxygen. So if you live in the Midwest, you have a basement, and you don't have light in that room, you really need to find a way to get an air source. If you can get a generator, that's great. I don't have a generator. My house isn't built to hook up to a generator, and I didn't have the like $800 it took to drop to get a generator. It's plain and simple. I don't have that much spare cash lying around. So I had to do it a little more ghetto method way, as I like to call it. So we covered these, right? These little battery operated air pumps, and I've got a couple props just to go with this. These are a lifesaver. Number two, something you can easily get to maintain some heat. So you're gonna lose temperature. Now bigger tanks, you know, your 100-gallon stuff like that, those are gonna hold temperature a lot longer. There's 2 ways to hold temperature without a generator. Now if you have a generator, again, get your heaters and air going. Those are the 2 biggest things. If you can power everything in your fish room, man, power everything in your fish room. So first things first, most of your heat's going to rise, right? It's going to come out of the tank and go up through the top. More than likely, you have some basic lids or you have no lids. It's the easiest escape path for all of your heat. I fixed that problem by sealing almost all of my tanks, except for I think the 2 in my bedroom, with these. This is actually the exact brand I went to my local Fred Meyer, and I bought, they had a big rack of them, and it was like 14 or so. And, you know, we've got several tanks that are all together where I could use one blanket to cover like 4 or 5 tanks. So I just reached in, grabbed them all, and yanked them off of the shelf. And, you know, these, you can get them way cheaper. Now, if you're not doing this in like a hurry like I was, go to Amazon. You can get 10 packs of these things for like $10 or less. You can get like 20 packs for like 15. I mean, they're cheap. And these are just those little like survival blankets or space blankets. They're a thin kind of mylar film that reflects radiant heat. So this is not like a long-term solution, but all that heat that's radiating up out of your tank, if you cover the top of the tank with that mylar blanket, everything that's coming up is going to radiate back down in. Now, you can't necessarily cover the entirety of your tank, and if you can, and you're fine with fully blacking out your tank, and you've got air, like from a battery-powered air pump, perfect. Maybe you run everything on sponge filters, you're using battery-powered air pumps, you're wrapping them with mylar blankets. But how do we, over a long period of time, really boost that heat? Because these are not enough. So there's 2 options. Number one, you could get the like 72-hour heat packs that we use in fish shipping. They're not very expensive. You can find them online. Again, this is a great thing. You can just store away in a box for whenever the emergency purposes are, your mylar blankets and that, or you can do what I did. This is there's a caveat to this. You need to have a way to heat water. So if you have gas heat, like you have a gas water heater, that's a way to get hot water. And if it is reliable, you can even keep doing water changes to keep oxygenated fresh water. You can do like a water change a day, do 50% water changes. That brings warmth and it brings fresh oxygenated water into the system. That's going to help your fish. Or if you have to go a little bit more hardcore, you got a coal barbecue grill and a big pot, and you're going to boil water. water bottles, or in this case, temporary heaters. So you can see, I mean, literally, like, I normally use this little 1 liter bottle for filling my salt water for doing brine shrimp. You guys have seen that in a previous video. I went out and bought a bunch of these to supplement that. And again, I went to Fred Meyer. They're cheap, run-of-the-mill, generic bottled water bottles. They're thin, cheap plastic. But what I did is I got water as hot as I could. And not, you don't want to go full boiling if you're doing it on a grill or something like that. If you go get like one of the Coleman gas grills, or you have a coal grill, something like that, where you can produce heat and you're boiling, you want to get it like where it's steaming, but right before you're getting a true boil. So hot, scalding water out of the tap, just as hot as you can get it out of the tap if you have gas heat. You might want to wear some gloves doing this, like some leather work gloves or something like that, because, you know, holding a hot bottle full of water is gonna hurt. I definitely like burned the tips of these fingers holding water bottles. And I mean, it was light. Don't get me wrong, they're fine, but it stung in the moment. And all you're gonna do is you're gonna fill this water bottle, you know, leave a little bit of room at the top for air, and seal it. And what that's gonna do is all that hot water, it's gonna let oxygen in. It's gonna try and push that oxygen out, but it's gonna be sealed. So it's gonna create this little oxygen pocket. That's gonna help this bottle float. And all that hot water can sit in a tank, and it will slowly radiate out for a couple of hours. I was rotating my bottles every 4 hours while I was awake, and during the night I would do one big one before I went to sleep. If I woke up in the middle of the night and I wasn't completely exhausted, I would go back down and switch bottles out. The example, I would put 2 of these in a 40 breeder. I would put 1 of these in every tank that was 20 gallons or less. And then in like the 90-gallon, the Guppy Palace, and the big Rainbow Community, for example, those got 3 of these and a 1 liter like this. And again, you know, I'm just leaving this little bitty gap, maybe an inch from the very top of the cap, half an inch, just enough so there's a little bit of air, but mostly water, as hot as you can get it out of a tap if you have gas. If you're electric heated and you got a grill to where you can heat something up, get it not boiling. That part where it starts to steam, but you're not seeing bubbles really forming yet, because you don't want to put boiling hot water in these bottles and then put it in your tank. You want it kind of like, I guess scalding hot would be what we're looking for here. But this was my biggest trick. Honestly, this maintained just enough bonus temperature so that even when the house, like, I have a little battery-powered temperature gauge that sits in my grow room with my fry and some of my Plants for Profit tanks, and it was reading like 61 degrees. And that is a thermally insulated room with a door, so it lets a lot less heat out. So that was the warmer room. The rest of my house was probably like 56, 57 degrees, just after a period of time, because it was just cold. And, you know, this is the hard part. Having fish that are just naturally tough helps. Rainbow fish are really hardy, but at the same time, I didn't lose any of my Leopoldi angelfish. I didn't lose any guppies. I didn't lose my Kochu tetras. I have an Episto in with those Kochu tetras. I didn't lose anything. Now, I'm going to count that to a lot of luck. I'm going to be brutally honest with you guys, but I think the combination of things helps. So I'm going to show you the short video, and you'll see, I'll put that on now. You can see as we kind of tour around the fish room, right? You're going to see like how much those Mylar blankets covered. I'll show you some of the water bottles and where they're put. And you can kind of see like where I'm letting, how much light is coming into that room, and get an idea of where I didn't put air pumps, because those planted tanks are getting enough light for those plants to do some minor photosynthesis and produce oxygen throughout the day. And that's just enough for those fish. So let's dive into that video real deep here, and then we'll come back and we'll finish this up. So here you can see the Mylar space blankets I'm using, and I've kind of opened up the one over the Shelly's tank just so you can see the air power pump running in that. And you can see where just like, as I zip around this room, you can see how much light is coming in through today. And like even with the Guppy Mansion here, you can see it only covers like half of it. And there's enough light that's coming through from that window to let those plants start photosynthesizing some. And then like the back of that tank isn't covered, so it's getting light. The backs of these tanks are getting a little bit, but realistically, they're all running off air power. And you can see with me in here, this is 63 degrees. So body temp and this thing sealed up, only 63 degrees. And you can see that humidity is a lot higher. You know, the Angel tank gets some minor light through the back. And then again, you can see this. Here's the battery-powered air pump down to an air stone, run in, pushing air into the Shelly tank to help make sure they're oxygenated and their water is moving. And you can see the bottles. I've got 2 bottles floating here. This is right after you can see kind of a light glaze from the steam. And the video quality is not the best. Again, there's not as much light as there usually is, so it's a little grainy in the video. I'm sorry, I really couldn't do anything about this, but I really wanted to show you guys exactly what I was doing with some of my tanks so that you get a good idea of how I, with no generator, 55 hours without power, 0 fish lost. And it didn't take a lot. So here you can see where my air pump normally would be to run a bunch of these tanks. I've got 2 of the Marina pumps that are running all of my baby rainbow tanks through some gang valves. So they're just, those 2 pumps are replacing 5 tanks worth of air. And I lift this here trying to show you guys like some of the condensation and moisture from the heat. But I lost so much light that the camera just like really lost focus. You can barely see a bottle there. I was trying really hard to get it to focus. I'm sorry this is going a little longer than it should, but just plain and simple, this was everything I could do to make sure you know, I wasn't losing fish. I took time off of work. I actually hurt my back during this power outage. Here you can see I lifted up and you can actually see some of the condensation here a little better. And this is not touching the water. So this is condensation from the heat, and then it's radiating that heat back down, but some of that water is getting stuck at the top. That little bit matters a lot with these things, guys. So those are my major tips just in what I used. We're going to go ahead and you can see 63 degrees. That means that water is probably 60. Very, very cold. So we're going to bounce back to me, and we'll go back to some final tips and finish out. So there you go. You guys saw how my fish room was, and some of the other fish rooms were set up, well, other fish rooms. The display room and then the other tanks around my house were set up very similarly. Those rooms have similar or less light, so it was even grainier imagery. It was really hard for me to get some what I would consider good video to show you guys tank to tank. But you know, as I walked around, I was checking tanks every hour on the hour. I was rotating those bottles every 4 hours, a little faster in like the evening. So like when I woke up after the night, I would do that. I would change them out, and then probably only 2 hours later do the first change just to get that extra bit of heat in. And then like 2 hours before I was going to go to sleep, I'd swap the bottles out, and then right before I wanted to go to sleep, I'd do another set of bottles, push that extra bit of heat into the water just to make sure, and then making sure those Mylar blankets are over the top. They're as tight as I can get them. You're not trying to like fully tight wrap them like a Christmas present or something, but just, you don't want some big air gaps coming out the top so that the air's just coming up and flowing out. You want it to kind of radiate back down and stay concise. And then finally, you know, for the tanks that you can, especially if you don't have a lot of plants, those little battery powered air pumps. I mean, this, you saw me look down. This guy here, real lifesaver. I picked up mine at Aquarium Co-op. I'm sure there were plenty on like Amazon and stuff, but they're my local fish store. I want to support a local business whenever I can, and it didn't rely on shipping. I could drive out there and pick it up. Now, if you're prepping this ahead of time, here's my advice to you: heat packs, bottles, Mylar blankets, battery power, air pumps. Have that combination. If you're doing planted tanks, man, plant the heck out of them. And if you're in a room where you're getting some light, you've got windows, make sure they're getting that light. It's really important because that helps push that extra bit of oxygen more into your water, and that's going to help save your fish. And finally, if your fish are healthy, they can take temperature swings a lot more than we might think. Now, some fish, you know, your German blue rams, your discus, these fish like to live real warm compared to most tropical fish. It's going to be a little tougher. But for fish that can normally live in like the 74 range, they live in environments where it gets colder, or they'll get massive flash floods of rain that bring a lot of water down really quick, and that water's not the same temperature. It's a lot colder. So you're going to see big temperature swings. Your fish can handle it. But number one, after all these tips, the most important thing, do not feed your fish. Don't do it. The answer should be simple, but let me explain why. If you give them food, they're going to poop. And when they poop, they create waste, and that waste creates ammonia. The biggest thing that we're worried about when we lose our filtration is ammonia and nitrite spikes. So make sure that you stop feeding. As soon as you lose power, stop feeding, and do not feed until you've had power back for a full day. And that might seem harsh, but your fish can take it. Now, if it's been like a week and you're still not going to get power back, do a light feeding after a big water change. Do like a 50% water change. If you can get warm water, do that big water change. Light feeding. Next day, another big water change. Make sure that you are not risking any ammonia spikes. And with that too, if you have canister filters or hang-on back filters, if you have ceramic media or something like that in there, pull that media out of the filter, put it in the tank water. There's no circulation going, but you know what? Having it in there is going to keep that little bit of bacteria alive a little bit longer and also help filter stuff. Now, if you run purely on sponges and they're in a canister, if you lose power for more than a day, the safest thing to do is to not have your filters turn on right away. Unplug all your filters. If you know you're going to be out of power for a while, go and clean all your filters. It sucks because now you got to recolonize all your bacteria, but it is better than the risk of having your bacteria go septic. You're probably going to be like, shame on you when I say this. I did not do that with my filters because they have a decent water volume in all of them. And I was paying some attention to them, making sure they stay submerged. And just like I knew kind of the timing, and I knew how much bacteria is going to be naturally in my plants and down in that stuff, or like the sponge filters. A lot of my tanks are run on sponge filters that don't have plants, and the ones that do have plants, the canisters are there for like getting gunk out of the water and not necessarily purely the necessary biofiltration. I mean, some of them help, but you can do a lot with just plants. Look at Lucas Bretz. He does like basically no filters on anything. No issues, right? So that's the big thing. Make sure that you take as many steps as you can. Don't feed your fish. Use alternative heat sources that don't require power. Use something to help insulate those tanks. Even just a heavy blanket. If you got one tank and you lose power, a big, heavy, like down comforter or something like that is great for holding in temperature. Yeah, you're going to have to wash that comforter when this is all said and done because it's probably going to get a little nasty from some moisture coming up. But you know what? If you got to wash your down comforter and you didn't lose any fish, you're going to feel great at the end of that day. Because washing that down comforter, you're just going to sit there the whole time and go, I didn't lose any fish. This down comforter saved my fish. You deserve a well-treated wash, my friend, because you saved my fish. And then finally, guys, if you can, get a battery-powered air pump just to get a little bit of air going through your water, get that movement, make sure it doesn't get too stale. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome. And I lost power in kind of a split. So at first, I lost power for 18 hours. And then I'm going to fix that light. It's